Please note for this webinar, your microphones have been muted. Please make sure to include all questions in the Q&A section and send everyone, as we have our subject matter experts on standby to answer them. We will be sending copies of this presentation out, and they will be posted in WebEOC at a later date. Welcome to the State of Florida Division of Emergency Management's Hurricane Ian DR 4673 applicant briefing. We're here today to discuss and address the FEMA Public Assistance PA program's application procedures, administrative requirements, funding, and program eligibility criteria. My name is Colin Kenline, and I am one of the programmatic reviewers here for the Recovery Bureau here at the Florida Division of Emergency Management. Here with us today monitoring the chat is our subject matter expert, Mr. Ronald Baker, and they will answer your questions as they are asked in the chat. This map shows DR 4673's Florida Disaster Declaration for Hurricane Ian and its FEMA PA category designations as of October 5th, 2022. We will go over the declared categories of work and declared counties for each category of work. First, let's review this disaster's incident period. When a major disaster declaration is signed by the President, FEMA specifies an incident period. This establishes the date range for damage or losses to be eligible for federal disaster assistance. You, as the applicant, are responsible for showing that the work was required in response to the declared incident or to address damage caused by the declared incident. For Hurricane Ian, the incident period is September 23rd, 2022 until a later date that is still to be determined. The declaration date for Hurricane Ian is September 29th, 2022. The listed counties on the slide have been declared for Category A debris at 100% federal share for the first 60 days from the incident start date of September 23rd. To be eligible for assistance, damages must have occurred within the declared counties listed here. Additional designations continue to be made and can be made at a later date if requested by the state and justified by further damage assessments. All 67 counties have been declared for Category B, or Emergency Protective Measures, including direct federal assistance at 100% federal cost share for the first 60 days from the incident start date of September 23rd. Direct federal assistance, or DFA, is when the impact of an incident is so severe that the state or local governments lack the capability to perform or contract eligible emergency work. Then the recipient, the state, may request that the federal government provide the assistance directly. FEMA may task another federal agency to perform or contract the work provided it is an eligible activity, unless the work falls under the authority of another federal agency. FEMA issues a mission assignment to task the work and refers to it as Direct Federal Assistance, or DFA. DFA has the same cost share provisions applicable to the declaration. The counties listed here have been declared for categories C through G, or permanent work, at a 75 to 25 cost share split with 75% federal cost share and a 25% non-federal cost share. As a reminder, to be eligible for assistance, damages must have occurred within the counties you see listed on the screen. Additional designations continue to be made and can be made at a later date if requested by the state and justified by further damage assessments. Let's go over some important dates. Incident start date. This date is the benchmark for work performance. 100% federal funding is approved for the first 60 days for emergency work activities for the designated declared counties between September 23rd and November 21st, 2022. Next is the declaration date. This is September 29th, 2022, and it is the benchmark for the submission of requests for public assistance, or RPA. The RPA needs to be submitted within 30 days of the declaration date, or by October 29th, 2022. The incident end date is still to be determined. Public Assistance, PA, is FEMA's largest grant program providing funds to assist communities responding to and recovering from major disasters or emergencies declared by the President. FEMA, at the top of the pyramid, manages the program, provides technical assistance, and approves grants. Next, we have the state, or the recipient. We educate applicants, work with FEMA to manage the program, and implement and monitor grants awarded. And lastly, we have the applicant, or subrecipient. They identify damages, provide documentation, and manage funded projects. The FEMA Public Assistance National Workflow slide details the process steps that take place in the FEMA PA program. As you look at the slide, you'll see that you, the applicant, the state of Florida, and FEMA all have a role in the program delivery process from the start of the incident, which triggers the pre-award activities, all the way to the last step, final reconciliation and closeout. Next, you'll see this figure, which focuses on the applicant portions of the PA award process. Once a presidential disaster declaration has been declared and been received by the state, the applicant briefing occurs, and that is what you're attending today. Next, submit your request for public assistance by October 29th. Then, you'll have your exploratory call. The FEMA Program Delivery Manager, or PDMG, should initiate the call within 7 days of an applicant's assignment to a Program Delivery Manager. And then, following that, we have the Recovery Scoping Meeting, or the RSM. FEMA will conduct the RSM within 21 days of an applicant assignment to a PDMG, or Program Delivery Manager. Once your organization receives notice that its RPA, or Request for Public Assistance, was approved, and you have your exploratory call, FEMA will contact you to schedule a Recovery Scoping Meeting, or RSM. To help prepare you for your RSM, you should compile a list of claims specified by location to include damage descriptions, including photos of the damages, the scope of work, the nature of the work, and the estimated cost. You may also want to gather maintenance records and your entire insurance policy. Please note, you will have 60 days following your RSM to make claims and identify damages via your damage inventory. Next, we will discuss program eligibility. This is the eligibility pyramid: applicant, facility, work, and cost. We will start at the bottom with applicant eligibility. The first step is to determine if you are an eligible applicant. Eligible applicants include the state, local governments, state agencies, certain private nonprofit organizations, and other state political subdivisions. Wonderful! You've determined if you are an eligible applicant. The next step is to determine if you have an eligible facility. To be eligible, facilities must be damaged as a result of Hurricane Ian, located within the presidentially declared area, be the legal responsibility of an eligible applicant, and not be under the authority of another federal agency, such as the Army Corps of Engineers, or the Federal Highway Administration, or the National Resource Conservation Services. Some documents that support legal responsibility can include, but are not limited to, deeds, titles, lease agreements, and contracts. Next, determine if you have performed eligible work. Work as a result of damages from the incident must meet the following criteria to be eligible for public assistance funding. First, be required as a result of the declared incident. Second, be located within the designated disaster area. Third, be the legal responsibility of an eligible applicant. And lastly, not the responsible of another federal agency. The last step is to determine if costs are eligible. To be eligible for reimbursement, costs must be reasonable and necessary to accomplish eligible work. A cost is reasonable if it does not exceed that which would be incurred by a prudent person under the circumstances prevailing at the time the applicant makes the decision to incur the costs. The costs must be authorized and not prohibited under federal, state, territorial, tribal, or local government laws or regulations, and must be consistent with the applicant's internal policies, regulations, and procedures that apply uniformly to both federal awards and other activities of the applicant. Moving on to the public assistance categories. Eligible work is broken into categories. Category A, debris removal, and Category B, emergency protective measures, are both considered emergency work. The deadline to complete emergency work is 6 months from the declaration date. Within its discretion, the state, or the recipient, has the authority to grant a time extension of up to 6 months, and then FEMA may grant additional time extensions from there. Categories C through G are considered permanent work. The deadline to complete permanent work is 18 months from the declaration date. Within its discretion, the state, or recipient, may grant a time extension of up to 30 months for permanent work on a project-by-project basis, according to 44 CFR 206.204. During Hurricane Ian, most of you may have experienced emergency work, such as emergency protective measures. However, many of you may have experienced damages that may be eligible for permanent work assistance. You can stay up to date on if and when your county is declared eligible for permanent work reimbursement by checking FEMA.gov or on WebEOC. Now, let's review emergency work. A few items to note for emergency work and force account labor. Generally, for budgeted employees, straight time is not eligible, only overtime. For unbudgeted employees, you can claim both overtime and straight time. When you submit your documentation for force account labor, please ensure you include the following: the employee's name, job title and function, the type of employee, the days and hours worked, the pay rate with fringe benefits, the description of work performed provided in daily logs, activity reports, or other methods, timesheets, and your pay policy. Also, we're reviewing labor costs now, but equipment, materials, and supplies can also be found eligible as long as they are documented properly. Now, let's go over Category A, debris removal. Debris removal work eliminates an immediate threat to lives, public health, and safety. It promotes the economic recovery of the affected area to benefit the community at large. Debris includes, but is not limited to, vegetative debris, construction and demolition debris, and vehicle and vessels wreckage. Clearance, removal, and disposal will be considered if the removal is in the public interest, not merely benefiting an individual or a limited group of individuals. Debris removal eliminates immediate threats to life, public health, and safety, and immediate threats of significant damage to public or private property. And it ensures the economic recovery of the affected community to the benefit of the community at large. On September 6, 2022, new FEMA debris guidance was released that changed the measurement requirements applicants must ensure they adhere to in the contract terms in place with pre-existing and standby debris vendor contracts. Now, let's go over some alternative procedures for debris removal. Applicants may elect to participate in the alternative procedures for debris removal and receive reimbursement for straight time for the applicant's budgeted employees that conduct debris removal activities. The applicant opts in by including straight time in their debris removal, Category A, project claims. Work with your PDMG to include straight time of your budgeted employees who conduct debris removal activities in your Cat A projects. Debris removal from private property, or PPDR, is the responsibility of the property owner and is usually ineligible under the PA program. However, in limited circumstances, based on the severity of the impact of an incident and whether debris on private property is so widespread that it threatens public health and safety or the economic recovery of the community, FEMA may determine that debris removal from private property is eligible under the PA program. In such cases, FEMA works with the state and local governments to designate specific areas where debris removal from private property, including waterways, is eligible. The debris removal must be in the public interest, which, remember, means that it does not merely benefit an individual or a limited group of individuals. There is an approval process for PPDR, or private property debris removal, and you could reference the PAPPG version 4 for more information. Now, let's review private roads that are rarely used or have limited public access. If the public does not have unrestricted access, including roads with locks, gates, or guards, then removal and disposal of the debris, including debris placed at the curbside by residents, is typically not eligible for reimbursement. However, to be considered eligible for reimbursement, the applicant is required to submit documentation demonstrating all of the following: that the debris removal is 1, in the public interest, 2, is related to health or economic impacts, 3, is the legal responsibility of the applicant, 4, that the applicant has permission or right of entry. Since the road is privately owned, the applicant must show proof that they received permission to remove the debris. And 5, indemnification, or proof that the owner of the private road will not file a lawsuit against the applicant for removing the debris on their road. Now, let's look at commercial property debris removal. The most important item I want you to remember here is that commercial property debris removal requires FEMA's pre-approval. Removal of debris from commercial properties, such as industrial parks, golf courses, cemeteries, apartments, condominiums, and trailer parks, is usually not eligible because commercial enterprises are expected to retain insurance that covers debris removal. In very limited extraordinary circumstances, though, FEMA may grant an exception. However, FEMA must approve the work prior to the applicant removing the debris. You may be wondering, what about first push? Debris clearance, also known as first push or cut and toss, for emergency access may be eligible as Category B work if it meets the criteria in the PAPPG version 4, Chapter 7. First push may be eligible for PPDR even if the private road was rarely used for limited public access, however, and this is only considered a Category B, not Category A activity. Now, let's review what all 67 counties were declared for. Category B, emergency protective measures. Emergency protective measures are activities taken before, during, and after a disaster and are necessary to eliminate or reduce an imminent threat to life, public health, or safety, or they eliminate or reduce immediate threat of significant damage to improved public or private property. In addition to the examples listed on this slide, you may also be required to submit the following: a narrative and methodology regarding how personnel costs were calculated, and a statement including that only overtime and or reassigned or unbudgeted labor costs are included. 2, that no administrative leave hours were incorporated in documented costs. And 3, that staging was not utilized and is not incorporated in documented costs. Most common activities for reimbursement occur within or at the direction of an emergency operations center. The subrecipient may use its EOC, or Emergency Operations Center, to direct and coordinate resources and response activities for a period of time. Response activities conducted at EOCs are eligible provided they are associated with eligible work. Costs associated with operating the EOC are also eligible, including, but not limited to, 1, increased utility costs, 2, cost to lease a facility, 3, supply costs, and 4, meal costs. All are described in the PAPPG. Ineligible costs include, but are not limited to, the duplication of benefits, including benefits from another federal agency, or insurance. Additional examples of ineligible costs include continued school meal service during school closings, loss of revenue, and tax revenue. Seeing as how Hurricane Ian affected many beach communities in our state, let's review emergency protective measures for beaches. If a natural or engineered beach has eroded to a point where flooding from a 5-year flood incident could damage improved property, Cost-effective emergency protective measures on the beach that protect against damage from the incident may be found eligible. 1. Emergency sand berms are not intended to permanently restore the beach. They are intended only to provide protection from immediate threats. And 2, placement of dune grass or an emergency burn is only eligible if it is required by permit and is an established, enforced, and uniform practice that applies to the construction of all emergency berms within the applicant's jurisdiction, regardless of the circumstances. Let's talk about power restoration. Always a topic of discussion due to the administrative categorization of power restoration work. In short, FEMA recognizes that power restoration is unique in that work can both save lives and restore the functions of a facility, thus able to be categorized as Category B and Category F. In the Simple Procedures Memo released on September 6, 2022, FEMA provided applicants flexibility in how they claim these costs. Applicants may either claim the work as Category B or Category F. If claimed in Category B, emergency work, keep in mind that the force account labor straight time for budgeted employees is not eligible. 406 mitigation funding is also not eligible under emergency work. The upside is that Category B is funded at 100% federal cost share for 60 days. If claimed in Category F for permanent work, straight time for budgeted employees is eligible, and so is 406 mitigation. Permanent work is only funded at the 75% cost share, though. It's important to note that temporary power restoration work that is not completed in accordance with applicable codes and standards will be categorized as Category B. You should work with your assigned PDMG to categorize works appropriately. For donated resources, applicants may use the value of donated resources to offset the non-federal share of their eligible projects. All donated resources being claimed must be documented. Who, what, when, where, and why. FEMA considers unpaid individuals who volunteer their labor to an applicant to be third party, even if they are officially members or employees of the applicant's organization, such as volunteer firefighters at a PNP volunteer fire department. FEMA prepares the donated resource projects separate from the emergency work projects for the applicant's incurred costs. FEMA does not obligate the donated resource project until after it obligates all the applicant's emergency work projects. Documentation is important because if the donated resources are not insufficiently documented, they will not be considered eligible. Let's move on to permanent work, Categories C through G. Category C, or roads and bridges. This includes repairs of roads, bridges, and associated features such as shoulders, ditches, and culverts. Ensure that the road was maintained prior to the disaster, and only repairs of disaster-caused damages are eligible. Dirt roads may appear damaged by the disaster when in fact it was due to lack of maintenance. Be prepared to submit maintenance records or have them on hand or available. There is new policy guidance on this in FEMA's Submerged Road Policy that was published in April of 2021, and more information on this is available on Info Message 46. Bridges. Be certain to have most recent safety inspections on hand or available. For private roads under a homeowners association that are not covered or does not benefit the public unless the homeowners association is an eligible PNP. 2, the road services the needs of an educational, medical, utility, and or emergency facilities. And 3, for these services to be considered, an agreement of responsibility or maintenance is very important to maintain proper maintenance records for years leading up to the event. Dirt roads are very expensive to repair, and lacking maintenance records will result in an ineligible cost. Make certain you know which are FHWA roads, as FEMA will not reimburse those. Here are some best practices for unpaved roads. 1, ensure rural communities have a plan for establishing pre-disaster conditions. 2, Record road conditions by photo or video on a regular basis. And 3, keep thorough records of maintenance and repairs to include quantities of materials. Now, we have Category D, or water control facilities. This includes repairs of irrigation systems, drainage channels, and pumping facilities to include levees and channels. Check with your water management district if you are unsure of the legal responsibility of your water control facility. Category E is buildings and equipment. This includes repairs or replacement of buildings, including their contents and system, and heavy equipment. Work required to restore damaged buildings will be considered along with upgrades required by building codes and standards. This includes all structural and non-structural components, including mechanical, electrical, and plumbing systems, as well as contents, furnishings, and equipment within the building. Category F, or utilities, include repairs of water treatment and delivery systems, power generation facilities and distribution lines, and sewage collection and treatment facilities. FEMA will not reimburse for increased operating expenses or revenue lost if a utility is shut down. Category G projects include repair and restoration of parks, playground equipment, beaches, ball fields, and public cemeteries. The replacement of sand on beaches is only eligible under certain conditions. A beach is considered an eligible facility when all of the following conditions exist. 1, the beach is not a federally constructed shoreline under the specific authority of the USACE or the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. 2, the beach was constructed by the placement of imported sand. And 3, the applicant has established and adhered to a maintenance program involving periodic renourishment with imported sand to preserve the original design. Applicants should provide the following information to support eligibility of a beach. 1, all design studies, plans, construction documents, and as-built for the original nourishment. 2, all studies, plans, construction documents, and as-built for every renourishment. 3, documentation and details of the maintenance plan, including how the need for renourishment is determined and funded. And 4, pre- and post-storm profiles that extend at least to the seaward edge of the subaqueous nearshore zone. This is an example of a typical beach profile. Public assistance projects are processed as either small or large projects. On August 3rd, 2022, FEMA implemented a major change to its public assistance program by increasing the small project threshold to $1 million. If the project cost is less than $1 million, the project is processed as a small project. If the project cost equals or exceeds the threshold, the project is processed as a large project. A few items to note about the difference between a small project and a large project. 1, the minimum threshold is $3,500 to have a project. 2, federal cost share is paid upon project approval. And 3, funding is based on an initial cost estimate. Although there are fewer steps required to obtain small project funding due to the simplified procedures, all applicants must still comply with all relevant laws, regulations, and policies, and you are required to certify compliance. For large projects, the project cost is paid as work is accomplished, and you must submit quarterly reports on all open large projects. Expedited projects. We understand that some applicants may need access to funding on an expedited basis in order to address costs incurred responding to or recovering from Hurricane Ian. After FEMA determines you are eligible for the PA program and you begin project development, such funding may be available as an expedited project. Expedited projects are obligated at 50% of eligible costs incurred for debris removal, Category A, and emergency protective measures, Category B. Only projects totaling $1 million or greater can be processed through the expedited project process. Once the initial award of the expedited project is processed at 50% of the eligible costs incurred, applicants will need to provide all required documentation prior to the remaining funds being awarded. If you have questions on an eligibility determination for your county, please bring them to your recovery scoping meeting, held after you submit your request for public assistance. Now let's discuss procurement requirements. FEMA provides PA funding for contract costs based on the terms of the contract if the applicant meets federal procurement and contracting requirements. Contract costs must be reasonable. As one, FEMA generally considers contract costs reasonable when the applicant adheres to full and open competition. Two, local governments and PMPs must use their own documented procurement procedures that reflect applicable state and local government laws and regulations, provided that the procurement conforms to applicable federal law and standards. Some general requirements and best practices for procurement. 1. Document everything and retain those documents related to procurement. 2. Include FEMA's required clauses and provisions in contracts. The existence of an executive order from the governor does not automatically create an exigency or emergency. These situations are limited as to how long the dangerous conditions exist. Once the condition is over, FEMA would expect the applicant to terminate these contracts and competitively procure a new one if there is still need to continue work. If you are using sole sourcing due to emergency or exigency, you must 1. Justify them with proper documentation. 2. Use only during the period of actual, exigent, or emergency circumstances. And 3. Transition to a competitive method as soon as the period ends. For cost or price analysis, the applicant must perform a cost or price analysis in connection with every procurement action in excess of the simplified acquisition threshold, including contract modifications. The method and degree of analysis depends on the facts surrounding the specific procurement situation. And 2, make independent estimates before receiving bids or proposals. FEMA reimburses costs incurred using 3 types of contract payment obligations. 1, fixed price. 2, cost reimbursement. And 3, to a limited extent, time and materials. The applicant must include required provisions in all awarded contracts and maintain oversight to ensure the contractors perform according to the contract's conditions and specifications, as well as any purchase orders. FEMA does not reimburse costs incurred under a cost plus a percentage of cost contract or a contract with a percentage of construction cost method. A guidance document outlining these required contract provisions can be found on Florida PA under the PA Info tab. FEMA advises against the use of time and materials contracts and generally limits the use of these contracts to a reasonable time based on the circumstances during which the applicant could not define a clear scope of work. FEMA may reimburse costs incurred under a time and materials contract only if all of the following apply. 1, no other contract was suitable. 2, the contract has a ceiling price that the contractor exceeds at its own risk. And 3, the applicant provides a high degree of oversight to obtain reasonable assurance that the contractor is using efficient methods and effective cost controls. The applicant should define the scope of work as soon as possible to enable procurement of a more acceptable type of contract. Special considerations are issues other than program eligibility that could affect the scope of work and funding of a project. These include such things as insurance, floodplain management, hazard mitigation, environmental protection, and historic preservation and cultural resources. No double dipping. FEMA cannot provide assistance for disaster-related losses that duplicate benefits available to an applicant from another source, including insurance. Before FEMA approves assistance for a property, an applicant must provide FEMA with information about any actual or anticipated insurance settlement or recovery it is entitled to for that property. Applicants must make reasonable efforts to pursue and recover all claims. And applicants must obtain and maintain insurance on facilities with the types and extent of insurance reasonably available, adequate, and necessary to protect against future losses to the property. One type of insurance that you may already have is NFIP, or the National Flood Insurance Program. FEMA must reduce PA funding when the facility is 1, located in an area that FEMA has identified as an SFHA for more than 1 year, 2, damaged by flooding, and 3, uninsured for flood loss. If the applicant does not have flood insurance for the facility or carries inadequate flood insurance for the insurable facility, FEMA reduces eligible project costs by the lesser of 1, the maximum amount of insurance proceeds that could have been obtained from an NFIP standard flood insurance policy for the building and its contents, or 2, the value of the building and its contents at the time of the incident. Please inform FDEM if your facility has a building that is in a floodplain area. Hazard mitigation. Section 406 of the Stafford Act is a funding source for cost-effective measures that would reduce or eliminate the threat of future similar damage to a facility damaged during the disaster. Section 406 is applied on the parts of the facility that were damaged by the disaster and the mitigation measures directly taken to reduce the potential of future similar disaster damages to the eligible facility. FEMA considers mitigation measures to be cost-effective if any of the following criteria are met. 1, the cost of mitigation measures does not exceed 15% of the total eligible repair cost prior to the insurance reductions of the facility or facilities for which the mitigation measures apply. 2, the mitigation measure is specifically listed in Appendix J, cost-effective hazard mitigation measures, and the cost of the mitigation measure does not exceed 100% of the eligible repair cost prior to any insurance reductions of the facility or facilities for which the mitigation measure applies. And 3, the recipient or applicant demonstrates through an acceptable benefit cost analysis methodology that the measure is cost-effective. Many mitigation measures that do not meet the first 2 requirements above prove to be cost-effective based on a BCA. If the mitigation measure is not cost-effective based on the first 2 criteria, FEMA, the recipient, and the applicant will work together to develop a BCA or benefit cost analysis to determine whether it is cost-effective. As an applicant, you are responsible for complying with applicable environmental and historic preservation laws and regulations and all EHP permits. EHP reviews must occur before construction, and failure to comply with applicable federal, state, and local EHP requirements could jeopardize or delay your PA funding. All PA awards must comply with the requirements listed on the screen, such as the ones outlined in the National Historic Preservation Act, the National Environmental Policy Act, the Endangered Species Act, and so on. Federal requirement. If the facility is listed in or meets the criteria to be listed in the National Register of Historic Places, then, if an applicable code or standard requires repair in a certain manner, costs associated with work to comply with that code or standard are eligible, even if repair costs exceed replacement costs. This is an exception to the regulatory requirement that when a facility is eligible for replacement, FEMA limits eligible costs to be the less expensive of repairs or replacement. Federal cost share is no less than 75% federal and 25% non-federal. For our local governments, you will be responsible for 12.5%, and the state will match the remaining 12.5%. For state agencies, the federal cost share program is no less than 75% federal and 25% non-federal. In order to receive reimbursement, the applicant is required to enter into a funding agreement with the state as a pass-through entity. The funding agreement outlines the terms and conditions of accepting federal funding through the Public Assistance Program. Applicants will enter into a funding agreement with the state during the project development phase. All documents are subject to an audit by the state, FEMA, and the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, Office of the Inspector General. Failure to properly document any claimed expense may result in loss of funding. Additionally, you must maintain all records for 5 years post-grant closeout. Let's go over the documentation and retention of records. The applicant is responsible for establishing and maintaining accurate records of events, expenditures related to recovery work for which you request FEMA assistance. Failure to properly document any claimed expenses may result in a loss of funding. Applicants must also provide quarterly reports to FDEM via FLPA. Congrats! You may have determined that you are an eligible applicant, have an eligible facility, have performed eligible work, and have incurred eligible costs. If so, you're ready to submit your request for public assistance. Let's go over those steps. First, if you have never requested an account in Grants Portal, you'll want to follow these directions. To request Grants Portal access, the applicant must go on to the Grants Portal homepage at grantee, that's grantee.fema.gov, and click on the Register Your Organization for Public Assistance. You, the applicant, are then prompted to complete basic information about the organization, contact information, and location, and then submit the form for recipient review. The online form will prompt an applicant to select its organization type. If an applicant selects an incorrect type, the processing of the RPA will be delayed. For governmental entities, if there are events with an open RPA enrollment period in a state or territory, the applicant may continue to submit an RPA with this account creation request. If the applicant chooses to not submit an RPA at account creation, the recipient will review only the account creation request, and the applicant may submit its RPA later. Public nonprofit entities, such as those agencies or instrumentalities of SLTT governments, are generally considered SLTT, that's state, local, territorial, and tribal governmental entities, and do not need to submit additional documentation required by PNP applicants. These entities should select the government organization type that best describes them. If an applicant is unsure of its type, it should consult the recipient. PNP applicants must wait for account creation approval from the recipient before submitting an RPA. After the applicant completes the account request and the recipient and FEMA have approved the RPA request, the applicant receives a system-generated email with a username and temporary password to gain access to Grants Portal. The system will then prompt the applicant to create a permanent password. Once the applicant has access to Grants Portal, it can choose to follow the instructions below to either directly submit an RPA in the system or request an RPA to be submitted by the recipient on their behalf if an RPA was not submitted. This section describes how an applicant who has already created a Grants Portal account may submit RPAs. It's directly through Grants Portal. The applicant logs into Grants Portal and selects "Click here to submit an RPA for your organization" on the dashboard. Remember, you have 30 days to submit your request for public assistance. The deadline to submit RPAs for Hurricane Ian is October 29th, 2022. Complete all required information for private nonprofit organizations, as there additional PNP questionnaire step in the RPA request. And PNP organizations should provide all required information and documentation for this step before clicking Next. When finished, click Submit. Once submitted, the RPA goes to the recipient for review. The applicant can view the status of its RPA in Grants Portal. Applicants will also be asked to enter in their Unique Entity Identifier, or UEI, upon submitting their RPA. You can register for your UEI at sam.gov. As a reminder, the important steps are: 1. Get FEMA's Grants Portal access if needed. 2. Submit your RPA. 3. Schedule recovery scoping meetings. And 4. As always, document your efforts. Document, document, document. This slide contains contact information for our leadership here at the Recovery Bureau of the Florida Division of Emergency Management. Thank you for posting your questions in the Q&A chat. Please send any other questions to fdem-recovery-questions@em.myflorida.com or reach out to your regional coordinators. We will be sending copies of this presentation out, and they will be posted in WebEOC at a later date. Thank you very much. We'll keep the presentation open for about 5 more minutes, so you can ask the remainder of your questions.